How I first became involved with the Adirondack Folk Opera. Well, first, I initially went to their concert, the first concert they had, which was supposed to be a one-off concert, I think in connection with John Brown Lives, and was impressed, to say the least. I was blown away by it. And out of that, it became known that they wanted to carry this beyond just the one concert, the one musical experience. And so they decided to create an actual folk opera that would tell the story about the whole Lyman Epps, John Brown, all that, what happened up here, that whole story. And I became intrigued with that, the idea. I love history. I love local history, Adirondack history. Being involved with the arts, the whole concept of combining these things became pretty interesting to me. And then just in conversation, I think, with Helen DeMung, we were just talking about what was going on. And at that point, I was also doing some photographs of the choir, the Northern Lights Choir, for them. As we were going along with conversation, we got more in talking about how do we get the word out about this. And I said, boy, if there's anything I can do as a photographer to help out. And it went on from there. I wound up having the opportunity to meet and sit down with Glenn McClure, actually Helen and Glenn and another member of the choir, good friend of Glenn's, good friend of mine, Sue Grimm. We all went out for beers and a burger at a local tavern and got very involved in conversation about where we would be able to go with this. As far my perspective or my involvement, should say, is strictly support staff. You know, I don't contribute to the creative aspects of the music and the opera and all that. That's strictly Helen and Glenn and the choir and all of them. It's just what can I do to help get the word out about this whole project, and that's where I wound up becoming involved. The 7-minute clip thing, that was a lot of fun to develop. As time went along, this is after a couple of years of making progress on the folk opera itself and the different concerts and talking about how to get the word out. And I suggested that I could take and put something together to create like a little video, even though they're all still images. I'm calling it a video. It could be a YouTube thing. Actually, I think it is on YouTube. I said that I could put something together that would tell the story about what they're trying to do. And so we did that. We had done a ton of photography. I had a lot of photography leading up to that point. Then we started thinking about what we would need to tell that story. And so we went out and did some photography. I pulled some of my own stuff from my own archives just to give photographs of the Adirondack landscape to give a sense of where we are, where this history took place. And we also delved into some historic images reflecting on Lyman Epps and Garrett Smith and people like that to use in it. So I took music from the folk opera. Glenn and Helen recorded their story about it. And I sat down with the photography that we'd done and the music and Glenn and Helen's voiceover and started putting it all together to create something that somebody could sit down and in 7 minutes have a good understanding of what they're doing, a brief bit about the history of what happened here, what led to the creation of the start of establishing or creating this folk opera. And that was a lot of fun to do. It was challenging to get it right. I've done this kind of thing before, but it's usually been under a very tight deadline where we're shooting the same day, we're producing something to be shown that evening. It's very different than taking several months to work on something. There, the issue is, of course, we're taking the time to have it be perfect, or as perfect as we can make it. And so that was took a lot of time because I was always trying to make it better. tweaking one little thing here and another thing there. But one of the coolest part of that whole project of creating that piece was the sense of collaboration. I was working very directly with both Glenn and Helen, particularly Helen. She and I sat in front of the computer for I don't know how many hours, working and tweaking how this piece of music should start here and end there, and be brought up to be a little bit louder here, and then made a little softer there, and this image there, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was a lot of back and forth. And as photographers, as a photographer, we tend to work by ourselves, isolated in a lot of ways. And so the opportunity to actually collaborate with somebody on something was, for me, really interesting. And that was a very fun part of it. Yes, I did produce the piece, but it was with a lot of collaboration, particularly with Helen and certainly with Glenn. I think this story is important because it's a piece of Adirondack history, and a piece of history that's not particularly well known. It took place over a fairly short period of time when you look at the overall history of the Adirondacks, and I think that's one of the reasons it's not well known. And if you were to expand beyond just the Adirondacks, this is a true American story. And it's an American story that took place in the Adirondacks. It actually took place in a lot of other places around the country, but it did take place in a significant way in the Adirondacks. And I think it's important to tell the story to get the word out about what happened, its history, particularly since it's not that well known, and that it relates to the bigger picture of America. And the Adirondacks has had its place in the bigger picture of telling the American story, but this one is really unique. And that's, I think, what makes it special. To watch the last performance, which was the opera in its entirety, was exciting, to say the least. Been involved with this project for several years. I've watched it grow as Glenn has been writing it, as the choir has been performing it all along. It's been an ongoing process, and each year is another concert that shows other parts of it. And this past May was the entire opera. And to sit and watch and listen to the whole thing was pretty exciting. And I say watch and listen because when you go to a live concert, it's not just audio, it's visual as well. And it's really fun to watch. When you're going to an opera, which this will ultimately be a performed piece, it is even more visual. And so to see particularly the soloists when they step up to sing their particular parts, it was fun to watch. But to listen to the whole thing and have the story be told in full was really exciting. I see my photography as helping this project out in that it has helped tell the story about the project itself. The project is telling the story. The opera is telling the history, the historical story of what happened. My photography and the video that we created and some of the stills and things like that are helping to tell the story about the project and the development of the project. It's kind of getting the word out about what they're creating, what Helen and Glenn are creating with this Adirondack Folk Opera. And I've seen it all along as my job is to help get the word out about this project. And to have been a part of that, kind of working behind the scenes more than anything else, has been a lot of fun. Opera is unique. And when you say opera, a lot of us will conjure up an image of what we have as opera. Myself, back when I was a kid, I thought of opera as that stereotyped Italian thing that was done with all the flourish and the high-pitched voices and everything else. And I was never a big fan of it, quite frankly, until Jesus Christ Superstar came along. And that was called an opera. And I'm going, what do you mean that's an opera? And then I began to understand what opera really meant. And it's telling a story through music. And I realized then that opera can be so much more than what I imagine it as being all the time. And the whole idea of doing an opera about a piece of history is going to be, I think, different enough that that in itself will help bring attention to it. I think that's one of the values in it. The quality of the music, you know, the composition of the pieces, the Northern Lights Choir, Helen DeMung's direction, all that stuff put together is a very powerful and beautiful thing to listen to. I mean, it just sounds wonderful. And I think when you take that enormous amount of talent and put it together to tell a story through opera, that in itself will help bring attention to the story, a story that I think is really needs to be told. My favorite part of the opera? Well, certainly listening to the soloists perform their pieces, sing their pieces was quite powerful because those voices are quite powerful. Not only their singing is powerful, but the voices that they're bringing to life is powerful in itself. So that's pretty cool. That I really enjoyed. The choir itself, when you put 70 incredibly talented people together to sing this music, that has a power and a strength and a beauty that is almost overwhelming. You know, sit there and listen to that whole choir belt something out is really something. The piece, So Many Voices, which I think is towards the very end of the opera, is probably my favorite song, for lack of a better way to put it. I love the melody. I love the message that's being told in it. And it just sounds wonderful. And of course, it is bringing the opera to its peak. And so I would probably say that that is probably my favorite piece, although it's always hard to pick out what's your favorite on something like that. I mean, it's like a 2-hour piece, I think. The whole opera is like a couple hours long. There's a lot of great stuff in there, and to try and narrow it down to just one is tough. But I'd say that So Many Voices is probably the strongest piece from my perspective anyway.